Hey, what's up there, seventh grade? I wanted to put out a little video lecture of kind of what we would have gone over if you were in class. Uh, I'm more or less going to just be recapping a lot of the stuff that you should have already seen. I'm going to go over the slide that you've already gone through and taken notes on, but maybe you want to just have it in hand as we go through this again because maybe there's going to be some things you add to it. Or maybe this is going to help you kind of solidify some of the information that you may have heard over the last couple of days. I know this isn't ideal um, learning outside of the classroom, but we're kind of making the most of it. Uh, for starters, the one thing I kind of came across that I immediately thought of two people, all right, in class. I immediately thought of Benny and Logan Bader as soon as I saw this big fungus meme. I still don't get it. I feel like Benny's been saying it for years. I could just hear him right now wherever he may be, probably a mile away from me, screaming this at the top of his lungs while watching the video. But as soon as I saw it, I had to add it in. So just getting started here, on a baseline here, scientists have recently, and when I say recently, I mean the last couple hundred years. Um, so, history of Earth recently, right? Uh, Scientists have started to not only determine that fungi are their own individual group, they're very different from plants. Initially, before the field of, it's known as mycology, is the study of fungus. Before the field of mycology really took place in the 1800s, a lot of scientists assumed that fungus were also in the same family as plants. And as we go through this, and maybe as you've already seen so far, that is absolutely not the case, right? They're very, very different. For one, they're heterotrophs, right? Meaning that they have to, and this is where I'd ask the whole class, oh, what is a heterotroph? And somebody would probably have their hand up, and I'd pick on the person next to you because they don't have their hand up, and we try to get to the bottom of it. And basically, a heterotroph is something that needs to eat something else in order to obtain its nutrients. This is the opposite of an autotroph, which is what plants are, right? Autotrophs are able to make their own energy. They're eukaryotic, so these are going to be, especially, they're evolved from protists, right, in terms of the size and the scale, and now they're multicellular, okay, opposed to protists, which are unicellular, but they land in the category of eukaryotes opposed to prokaryotes, meaning that they're going to have a nucleus. They're going to have membrane-bound organelles, okay? They might be going through sexual reproduction as well. This is kind of the first that we're seeing of that. Protists, you've seen some protists may have gone through sexual reproduction, but in fungi, you're also seeing it. But again, this is still mainly asexual reproduction that's taking place. Okay. Now, maybe you've heard this term, but this is what makes fungus initially very confusing. People assumed that these hyphae that were being sent out were roots. They are roots, but they're not roots in the same way that plants use them as roots, right? These are seeking out absorbing nutrients and not using it for photosynthesis, but rather trying to take in those sugars and in some cases form a relationship with another autotrophic organism, right? We've seen that in lichens. All right, they're forming a symbiotic relationship with algae in order to kind of cohabitate and coexist and allow themselves to survive very harsh climates. Okay, but these are thread-like structures that form a network underground, and that's what's known as mycelium. This is what they were talking about in that video. If you've seen it already, that documentary I sent out, that wood wide web, right? there is a connection. This is what has made, technically, when they talk about the largest organisms, some people are going to say that the largest organism to exist is fungi, and I want to say it's either in Washington or Oregon, going off the top of my head, but it was a few kilometers big. So that would be by far the biggest living organism. Okay. Again, this is just looking at that hyphae as it's inside, and you see, you know, almost similar to how veins work inside the human body. It's transporting nutrients, right? The difference is whatever this mycelium wraps itself into is going to be almost like the stomach in the sense that it's going to be taking those nutrients, it's going to be breaking them down and processing it, bringing it back into the fungus itself, and then it's able to kind of grow and expand in that way. All right. But the difference, right? A lot of fungus lives underground. You can see, actually, these end up being, they refer to as the fruit of the, this is the fruit of the fungus. This is the portion that people are able to eat, similar to the fruit of a plant, right? We're able to eat the fruit of a plant is going to be those strawberries, those apples, whatever it might be. Similar idea here. Those fruits, if when they're consumed, in some cases, if we're talking about an apple, for instance, right, when consumed, those seeds are actually designed and have layers to be able to process through a digestive tract and come out fertilized and be able to land and plant and reproduce. Right, they're able to expand the size or the number of those apple trees taking root. Same thing is kind of happening here, right? These fungi are underneath on these gills. They have spores that are sometimes being released, and there's a lot of different ways that fungi are going to release their spores. It's all specific to what type of fungus it might be, and each one of these is wherever those spores may lie or land, another fungus is capable of taking root and growing. All right, so just going over as a general overview of the structure here. So you have the cap, and that's going to be the top portion of it. You have your gills, and your gills can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Okay, it might be gills that almost look similar to fish gills. It might be porous, where it actually looks almost sponge-like when you look close at it, or it could almost resemble teeth, almost these hanging looking teeth. All right, and the spores are going to be found inside of those. All right, or live on the inside of those rings or pores or teeth. And again, however it's going to release its spores is going to maybe determine what type of fungus it might be. Again, you have your stem or your stalk. On the inside of this, you would be seeing that hyphae. And if they extended down, you would be able to see the mycelium. Now, real quick, I just want to show you, as I have set up here. All right, just looking at your typical, this is a basidiocarp, all right, and looking at your typical fungus here, right, we have our cap. As you take your cap off, you're going to have those gills underneath it, right, and this is, I'm sure everybody has seen a basidiocarp. That's the most common. That's that toad character that you've seen in Mario. These guys, this is where those spores are going to be located. And as you continue to pull back, right, underneath the bulb, this is where the mycelium is going to connect, and it would actually go up through to the rest of the plant. And this is kind of where you would have hyphae, meeting the mycelium. All right, so it is two separate structures. Interior, it is still responsible for nutrient transportation. And as it gets to the exterior of that stem and gets outside of that bulb, that's when it begins to, it starts to form that mycelium. All right, so we have four major groups, and the way they're broken up, and this is, it's a little bit more sophisticated than the way we were breaking up protists. So as I said, protists kind of have that difficulty because they get thrown into some of them get thrown into that like miscellaneous category. Well, same thing kind of happens with fungi as well. You have your four major groups, and they're based on how they look and how they reproduce. Okay, so almost all fungi are going to be reproducing asexually by producing spores. Okay, as the key word there, almost. Okay, so mushrooms are the basidiocarps, right? They're that club fungi. And inside of basidiocarp are the basidia, which are club-shaped reproductive structures that produce sexual spores. So if those spores come in contact, again, as these spores might be landing on whatever surface it's going to be, there's a good chance in the right conditions you're going to be able to have these fungi spreading. All right, and here are just looking at the major groupings, right? So starting from left to right, you have zygomycota. Then you have the imperfect fungi, and the reason it's known as that imperfect fungi is because they actually haven't seen the exact mechanism of reproduction. So it kind of gets, again, thrown into this grouping of imperfect fungi. And anything that's in this imperfect fungi group has a chance, and not only a chance, but a really good chance of being put into one of these other groups or forming a totally different group. So is there a possibility that in the field of mycology there could be a fifth group? Yeah, there's definitely a possibility, right? If they find that they find the reproductive pattern of this imperfect fungi, but it's different than any other, then it's going to land in a different category. All right, Ascomycota, okay, and then you have the Basidiomycota. All right, looking again, this is just looking up a little more of a close up. You have your cap, your gills. I would say the cap, gills, and stem or stalk. Those are kind of the most familiar thing, or the things you should be most familiar with externally. As you get internally, you need to definitely be familiar with your hyphae. All right. All right, this is looking at, and this is actually designed in a laboratory setting, and it was a really cool way of showing how these spores are able to spread. They kind of just had a fan with that lighting behind it, so you could see the thousands and thousands of spores being released by these gills constantly. Now, is it going to be released nonstop? No, obviously those need to replenish. So it's not going to be a constant rate if there was a constant wind going on. But for the most part, anytime the wind is blowing, it's going to be transporting these spores. That being said, do you think you have them on the surface of your skin, especially this time of year as it's getting warmer? You're going outside. These are starting to maybe thaw out from the ground and reach the surface as it's almost April. Yeah, absolutely. You definitely have it on the surface of your skin. You definitely have fungal spores on your food that you're eating, and that's actually a big part of the reason why food is able to spoil and have. If you've ever seen fruit, if you've ever seen bread get mold on it, right? That's a type of a fungus. All right, that's not bacterial related. All right, these guys are pretty cool looking. I just thought it was really unique. These are actually known as wolf farts, and yeah, you heard me right, wolf farts. And anytime it rains, or as something might step on it, come in contact with it, that's how these spores are able to be released. And you can see the puff of spores, yes, puff of spores being released by that wolf fart, right? And wherever these spores may take hold, if it's an advantageous location, it's going to be able to give rise to more of these fungi. All right, so you have the ascus is the reproductive structure where spores develop on sac fungi. So again, just looking real quick, right? The The Ascomycota, you'll hear sometimes it's interchangeable with being known as sac fungi. All right. And they are the simple single-celled fungi. Many yeasts are sac fungi, including the common one used to make bread. Yeast is used to make several types of food for humans. We need yeast to make breads. It's a whole process called fermentation. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard the term yeast before. These are able to be both beneficial and detrimental. You may have even heard of, some of these are able to form, yeast infections in people, athlete's foot, right? Fungal infections of the skin. That's something that is commonly, the common way to treat it is to, make it an unideal, right, environment for the fungus that might be on your foot. Say with the athlete's foot, right? It's that skin irritation that might occur between your toes, but you end up getting it because you have, if you're not being hygienic with your feet, if you're not changing your socks, if you're wearing the same socks a couple of days in a row and they're getting sweaty, getting a little funky, right? The chances of you getting athlete's foot are really high, right? Fungi, as we're going to talk about, thrive in a dark, moist environment. And this is why after Hurricane Sandy, the crawl spaces were the first places getting tons of mold, as it was wetting the insulation underneath. That became moist, and obviously in a crawl space, it's going to be very dark as well. So that was the first place you were having mold and fungi kind of proliferate and expand through the rest of the house. And in some cases, condemning the house, and you had to knock it down, right? You get to a point where, the amount of money you would spend to remediate it is far outweighed by what it would be to just knock it down and start again. So sugars are broken down in an environment without oxygen, right? And this is anaerobic fermentation. So again, this is why they are thriving in they're going to be able to thrive in a dark environment with little amounts of oxygen. Even though they're single-celled, you may find them in colonies. So you will still see, so you're going to still see, even though they're individual single-celled, similar to some of our bacteria we talked about. If you remember Streptococcus or Staphylococcus, right? It's that growing in chains or clusters. Same thing might be happening in some of these instances as well. All right, so this is what some of the sac fungi might look like. All right, even though they have a different shape, they still have a lot of the same key structures, right? First and foremost, the hyphae, right? And as you could envision, as it goes further down, you're going to be having it meet that mycelium. Okay, here's another one. Here's another example of that sac fungi. All right, I may have misspoke. I don't know if I said molds before. If I did, I apologize. But zygote fungi, I may have said molds. I don't remember. But Zygomycota, all right, that's going to be landing in the category of mold. All right, and they're very commonly found in soil or on decaying plants or animal material. Okay, sometimes these might be parasitic, meaning that they have again, if you remember with protists being parasites, they're going to invade a host, they're going to take the nutrients away from it, they're going to, now parasites can kill the host. They typically don't want to kill the host because if the host dies, then more often than not, so is the parasite. So they want to take as much as they can without killing the host. That doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes you have these fungi that are going to be really harmful to some environments, especially especially if they end up becoming like an invasive species to a forest, right? If they're not native to that and there's no other animal that keeps that population in check, or as a natural, maybe a natural, we'll say predator in this case, but if it's a part of its natural diet, right? And if that's not in existence, it's not going to be able to keep the amount of this fungi growing in check. All right. So not all zygote fungi is bad though. Okay, you do have some forming a symbiotic relationship with plants. All right, and the tiny stalks are called zygosporangia, and that forms when a zygote fungus undergoes sexual reproduction. So this is one of the examples of fungi going through that sexual reproduction, which again is very unique for our timeline that we've been looking at. As we've looked at bacteria, right? As we've looked at single-celled organisms, a lot of them are going through asexual reproduction, the cloning, the recopying of genetic material. It has its advantages and it has its drawbacks, right? The advantage of sexual reproduction is you're going to have, this is where everybody would be hopefully raising their hand and saying genetic diversity, right? Sexual reproduction is going to increase the amount of genetic diversity, meaning that if there was let's just say there was a bacteria that was able to attack a specific type of fungus, this ensures that it's not going to wipe out all of that fungus, right? Because there's always going to be, or hopefully there's always going to be with that genetic differentiation, right? That genetic diversity, there's always going to be one that might be immune to it, right? Have a natural immunity or a natural defense against it. Even if it's a resistance that allows it to reach a reproductive age or a reproductive maturity. All right. Now, if you have bread that looks like this, you should definitely throw it out. You would get really sick if you were eating bread that has mold on it, for sure. Now, you could see the thing I like about this is the cross section that allows you to see the mycelium that's growing inside of the bread, and it's taking away those carbohydrates, it's taking in those sugars, and it's retrieving it and bringing it to the rest of that fungus, right? And that's what's going to allow this to go through. We talked about the stages or the characteristics of living things. It has to be able to grow and develop. That's what's happening, is it's taking energy. So a way to prove that this fungi is not an autotroph, right? Even though it might look like it to some, a way to prove it is if you were to put this in the closet, this would not only grow, it would more likely than not would be thriving. It would grow better than being in a well-lit environment. So that's one way you could absolutely prove that fungi are not plants. Because if you were to put a plant in a dark room, those autotrophs rely on converting that sunlight, converting light, and turning it into energy for the rest of the plant. All right. The group contains a hodgepodge of fungi. This is that imperfect fungi. The key thing here, right? The members are going to eventually be determined, hopefully. So these have an opportunity to leave this group and join one of the other groupings. Could also, as I said in the beginning, could also form an entirely new group. So scientists, and when I say scientists, we say mycologists, are reclassifying these fungi when they observe a sexual reproductive stage in the fungus's life form or life cycle. All right, this was just an example showing penicillin. This is cool. This is going to be more trending towards the importance that they play. This probably should have been a couple slides over. We're going to double back to this. All right, so fungi play important roles in human food production. Fungi are an important part of the environment because they decompose dead plant and animal matter. And most importantly, they're not only breaking it down, but they're recycling it. So they're making it available to plants again. This is going to increase soil, the fertility of soil, allowing those plants that are taking root in that soil to be able to obtain those nutrients and grow, right? And if you were to go into the forest, you would be saying in many cases fungi and plants growing together. A lot of the times they're helping one another out. All right, so the roots and hyphae weave together to form structures called mycorrhiza. So mycorrhiza, this is going to be where, again, they're contributing, they're sharing some nutrients with each other, or they're providing something to one another, right? That plant might be able to uh, grow its roots longer than prior because that mycorrhiza is helping it, right? Maybe it's breaking down soil, breaking down rock and making more soil. Maybe it's breaking down any dead, decaying matter and giving it to that plant. While in turn, those roots are going to be sending some of the sugars down from photosynthesis and providing it to that fungus. Right. This is forming a beneficial relationship between the two of them. All right. And this diagram is again just showing not to be tacky here, but the circle of life in a lot of ways. You have, we'll look at a leaf in this case. As it gives way and falls onto the ground, you're going to have the decomposers. Now, we're looking at decomposers most specifically with fungi, but there are other types of decomposers, right? Millipedes, worms, those are decomposing insects. If you were to look at those bottom dwellers of the sea, right? Your crabs, different types of mollusks. They're going to be some decomposers as well. But they're going to, the most important thing here is that fungi is able to grow on the surface of that animal, or in this case, a leaf that has just fallen, and they're able to send that hyphae through, break it down, and hopefully get to a stage where it releases spores. As the leaf dies, so is that fungus. It's going to either fall up or maybe fall into the soil and be able to continue to live as a possibility as well. But the idea is to hopefully reach a level of reproductive maturity to be able to pass on some of those spores to reproduce. All right, this is again just looking at the different types of fungus that you might see. This is a basidiocarp that is growing on top of a tree that's fallen. So fungi make nutrients available and improve water absorption by roots. Plants make food that the fungi and mycorrhiza can use. Although fungi can cause disease, they are also used to make important medicines. I know one of the big medicines that they are responsible for making is insulin. Anybody who is a diabetic knows the importance of it. Insulin, again, it's derived from. They have to genetically modify some of these fungi a little bit, but in order to replicate and create insulin for humans to use. All right, actually, that's exactly what this slide's talking about. All right, the one thing that was kind of interesting to me, and so as beneficial as they're able to be, there are some types that you should definitely not interact with. There are definitely some that are very poisonous if you were to eat them. The way they're poisonous, for instance, the death cap. The death cap is one of the most common. It's one of the most commonly mistaken mushrooms. So this is responsible for the most people eating it. Fortunately, most of the people survive it. The one that is responsible for killing the most people, though, is this destroying angel. The way it works is as you eat the chemical makeup of these. So it ends up, as you ingest it, essentially what happens is it ends up, as it enters your bloodstream, as you break it down, as it reaches your liver and your renal, meaning your kidneys, uh, as it reaches your liver and your kidneys, it ends up the chemical makeup of this ends up leading to liver and kidney failure. So without medical intervention, a lot of times, you know, most of the time, it's going to kill people. This is actually a really common way people used to uh, like assassinate people, right? Going back hundreds of years. If you put in one of these mushrooms in with somebody's meal, it could definitely kill them. Look at this, this fly agaric here. It looks, if you're not a mycologist or you're not kind of a field expert, mistaken identity for some of these, right, is one of the most common ways people end up getting sick. All right. Now this is the other side of it. So these are the beneficial mushrooms that you are able to eat, right? I'm sure you've heard of portobello and shiitake mushrooms, right? The white button there. But as you kind of go back, I know these are just illustrations of it, but just kind of bouncing back and forth, right? Uh, you know, the Courtner and the portobello sort of look similar in this instance. Obviously, it might look a little bit different with an actual picture, but again, you could see some similarities how people might be able to mistake the identity for one mushroom to another. And this is why you hear in kind of field survival guides, don't eat any berries or fungi unless you are 100% certain and are very familiar and trained in which are poisonous and which are not. All right, so this leads us to lichens. So I mentioned this earlier. Lichens, now this is a structure that's formed when fungi and certain photosynthetic organisms grow together. More often than not, that photosynthetic organism is going to be algae. And this is what I know in the documentary they talked about it. This is one of the ways that a lot of people were able to, well, I shouldn't say people. This was a way that a lot of those aquatic plants were able to become terrestrial plants. They kind of relied on that, that fungus and that algae forming that relationship together. One might be providing some shelter and creating soil, while the other is able to photosynthesize and kind of share those sugars that it ends up creating. So after lichens are established in an area, they improve conditions for other organisms. They end up becoming the base of that food web, so they're able to provide food for a lot of these organisms, right? Especially in harsh conditions, in harsh environments, maybe where vegetation isn't is widely common or as readily available. These guys are going to be kind of essential, especially forming that base of that food web. All right, you can see the algae interlaced with the fungal hyphae. So they're giving it support, they're giving it protection, and in turn, that algae is going to be sharing its nutrients, right? So this is a great example of a symbiotic relationship where, a parasitic relationship, if this hyphae or if this fungus was stealing all of it without providing anything, right? That would be the opposite of the relationship that you kind of have formed here. All right, and again, if you look over on the left here, it's incredibly important that the rest of these organisms are relying on these lichens. Maybe when these grasses and wildflowers aren't as readily available, these other primary producers are able to rely on some of these lichens to be able to support them until the rest of those producers are readily available. But without these, obviously, the rest of this takes a huge hit. All right, and then we get through. This was a good video posted. All right, I did want to go over a couple of different questions. I know one of the questions, I was just trying to come up with some as I was going through. So how is a lichen similar to mycorrhiza? So you could say that both a lichen and a mycorrhiza are structures that are made up of a fungus and another autotrophic organism, and they're going to benefit one another in some way, right? That autotrophic organism is going to provide the sugars, while the fungus is going to provide, again, maybe it's breaking down some of the rock and turning it into soil, but at any rate, they are very similar to one another. Um, let's see, what's another good one? Um, so the one I also like to talk about is in the event of an asteroid, right? We talk about these mass extinction events. In the event of an asteroid, say it hits Earth's surface, it sends plume of ash and debris into the upper atmosphere, and it blocks out the sun. And let's just say in a cataclysmic event, it's blocking out the sun for months, right? These fungi are going to thrive. Not necessarily these lichen fungi, because uh, those the algae that is kind of forming that symbiotic relationship is going to definitely take a hit. But in a lot of cases, those fungi, they're going to thrive in that darker environment. They're going to thrive on dead organic matter to break down. So, um, and again, that kind of goes back to how how different fungi are from plants, right? That's probably one of the biggest things I'm trying to drive home is the differentiation. I know that a lot of times, you're going to even hear people, even with the field of mycology well established, people end up assuming that they're both in the same field when they're not, right? Fungi are going to be heterotrophs, and obviously all plants are autotrophic, meaning they're going to be making their own energy. And I guess there are some. There's always an asterisk next to it, right? You're going to have some carnivorous plants, but those aren't necessarily what we're talking about in this instance. But at any rate, I hope that this maybe was able to help some of you guys out. Uh, if it doesn't, if something is still unclear, please feel free, reach out to me, shoot me an email. As I say, I'm not giving you my phone number. You're not gonna text me. That's the last thing I need is getting like memes at like midnight about Big Chungus. So I appreciate that. But again, if you have any other questions, I'm going to be trying to make more of these. Give me some feedback. Let me know if you think these are helpful or not. But I hope everybody has a good rest of their day. All right. So, yeah, smash the like button, whatever else they say. And yeah, later, seventh grade.